In this demo, we're going to show you how to use the Boardwalk Design Framework to deploy an application on the Boardwalk application engine. The application we're going to show today or work with today is called an issue tracker, where you want to be able to collect information on projects from multiple users all working at the same time. The information inside of Excel is pretty standard. You have things like pick lists, where you want to be able to specify the current status or maybe the current priority. You even use things like conditional formatting, where you go in and say, is this actual resolution date after expected resolution date? And there's also a formula in here that it says take the date identified and add required time to fix days to it in order to come up with a new value. Well, all of this information is used exactly as is inside the Boardwalk Design Framework, which is an authoring environment that has an Excel file. It is an Excel file with a ribbon added to it that guides you through the process of creating an application using the Boardwalk Design Framework. So I'm going to start by saying I want to add a standard cuboid here, and this makes a new landing place for me to be able to go over to the tracking log and say, okay, let's take this information and grab the entire set and say copy and paste and bring it back over here, and I'm going to paste it in this location. So what I've done is I've taken the application information from that other workbook and I've copied and pasted it as is. So you can see here's my formulas, here's my conditional formatting, everything that I had in that other workbook is now in here. And so all I'm going to do is I'm going to say let's call this an issue tracker. And then I'm going to go ahead and change the name of this workbook too, because this is my master design framework. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to say issue tracker template. And now I'm going to say, well, let's go ahead and push this information to the database. I've created this landing spot, so I'm going to say link export, and it says, well, push this information out to the database. And at this point it's saying, well, who are you? And what this is doing is communicating to the Boardwalk application engine, which is running as a web app on the database, and it's pushing the data from this spreadsheet out to a web app and making it available for not only this application, but any source of information that needs to be able to interact with the data. So you can see here, this is a web URL, and here's just a quick screen showing you the actual data that I just pushed out to the database, available and ready for other applications. There's no schema creation. Everything is created automatically using the patented data structure for Boardwalk, which is a single schema that uses directly information from inside of a spreadsheet into the database. So now I've gone ahead and I've created the database information, but the formatting that is used every time somebody interacts with the data is actually provided by the Excel workbook. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to change some of this formatting and say I want to make this be read-only. This information, I'm going to say I want to be able to make this so it's editable. So I'm going to click up here and say make this as editable. And then I'm going to say, okay, well, let's take this information and I'm going to create a format. So first I did work over here. Now I'm going to come over and say generate a format, and I say single row format, and it picks up this information, and then I say go ahead and assign this, and I assign this. And now I don't want to have this column over here show up every time, and this column identifies the row for the database. So I'm going to say let's go and just select the formatting and say hide that. And so now when I come in and I say test this as a format, that column disappears and all the information that I need for sharing this with other people is put in place. You can see here's my pick list that I put in. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to add a couple other things. I want to be able to have these update boxes show when people do submit and refresh. So I'm going to say attach event macros. And I also want to be able to have the ability to control whether people can add or delete rows or copy rows. So I'm going to say add some pop-up menus to this, and when I add the pop-up menus, you can see when I do a right click there's a bunch of commands that are available, and then on a cell when I do a right click, and then if I come over and I do a right click on a row, I've got all these options here that are defaults. And so now I've got everything basically set up with the exception of defining the access control. Because right here it says assign to owner, and I don't want to do check-in, check-out, but I do want all these people to work at the same time on the data, but only see the information they're working with. So if I come in and I say add a user access sheet, which picks up who this user is, so far it's only the admin user, But now I'm going to come over, I'm going to say, you know what, I want to take this data, the assigned to owner, and I'm going to create that as a column over here. And basically what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to take the information in the workbook and share it with a couple people, a manager, and also user 1, but I want user 1 only to see the information that is assigned to them when they interact with the database. So it works exactly like an auto filter. You can have as many additional columns as you want here in order to define basically what a user can see. But now that I've set this up, I'm going to say, well, push this to the database, because again, this is managing data in the web app, but having people work inside of Excel. So now I've created that as a user access, and now I'm going to come in and say, well, let's assign this row criteria to this sheet. So now this makes it so that whenever somebody interacts with this data, it's going to look at this user access and say, well, who is this person and what can they get access to? So now the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create what's called a template manifest. And a template manifest basically is the recipe. It says, what's the information inside this workbook that I've just created on the database, and how does it relate to the information in the database so that when people download it, they're able to get only the information they're supposed to get. And what I've done here is I've said, make the user access sheet not visible. And realistically, when you're doing this as an admin, you wouldn't have this in here. You'd have this in a separate admin template. But for the purposes of this video, we're doing it in here. So I'm going to say, okay, well, again, as you've seen me do a couple times already, push this to the database. And now this is created on the database. Now, I don't need this to go along with the template. You just need to be able to create it and then have it connected through what we call ad hoc. And ad hoc just means when you open something up or when you open up the issue tracker, it goes and grabs it, uses it, and then puts it away. So now I've completed everything I need in order to be able to share this with the manager and the user 1. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, and then I'll do a save as, and I'm going to put this over here, and I'm going to say this is the issue tracker user template. And now I'm going to switch the mode. So far I've been in the design mode. I'm going to switch this to the user mode, and I'm going to go ahead and clear this data. So as you can see now, the template is empty. There's nothing in here except for this welcome screen. I can come in and I can say issue tracker template instructions, put anything else you want in here. But now basically you can provide this by email or through any mechanism to get the Excel file to the user, and then when they come in they'll say, well, download the data. And now this time I'm going to log in as the manager, and what it does is it looks at the database and it fetches the information that's appropriate to this user's login, brings it into the workbook, and displays it to the user. So you can see here that now this has grabbed the data from the database, and I see all the data for user 1, etc. So I'm going to say, well, let's save this as manager. And now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to close this, and I'll go ahead and close this too because we don't need this anymore. And I'm going to go back and open up that same user template, and this time I'm going to download it as user 1, right? So last time I did it as manager, this time I'll do it as user 1. And now this time when it fetches the data from the server, it's going to say, well, who is this user and what rows should they get? So when you look at the database that comes across, only the data for user 1 is here. So that's part of the capability of Boardwalk, is this dynamic access control. I'm going to say save this as user 1. And then I'm going to make a couple changes here. I'm going to switch this to close. I'm going to go over here and say, this one is work in progress, but escalation is required. I'm going to come over here and I can make a change here and say this should be 22. You can see that this date's updated here, and I'll say more time needed. And I'm working in isolation, doing all these changes without having to connect to the database. So it's very important to be able to show that when you're working with Boardwalk, you're doing things locally on the desktop, and that's not until you're ready to share something, in this case these changes plus this new row that I just added. At that point you say, well, submit this data to the database. And I say, these are my updates, and I'll push this change out here. And now I've created a slice on the database that can be shared with other people. And you know what, I'm going to go in, I'm just going to change one more thing really quickly and switch this to work in progress again. And I'll say submit, and I'll say another update. And so now I've done two different things to the database. And these are created as new versions, or as versions on the server, such that when other users, now in this case the manager, go back and refresh their spreadsheet, they'll see the changes come in at a cell level. So when I go in and I say refresh my spreadsheet, it goes to the database and it grabs all the changes that have happened since the last time I opened up my workbook. So as you can see here, here's the new row that was added. Here were the changes that I did. Here was the change that I did for this. You can see the other update over here. All the conditional formatting still working. So if I come in and I say, this should be 2/3, this becomes red. You can also see over here that this change was done. And what's happening is that the database is tracking all this information, and you can go back at any time and you can say, oh, well, this has changed from whip to close. I want to see who changed this. And I say, show me a cell history of this over the last week. It'll show me the changes that were done. So of course we just built this, so we're only seeing one change. But if I go back and I say, show me all the changes to the database, you'll see that here's the update that we did initially, and then here's the one that I did second, right? Because we did 2 submits. And at any time you're able to go back and reproduce what somebody did at any time simply by clicking on this and saying, show me the data as of that time. And then you can see here I recreated on demand the changes I did that first time. And all this information can be pushed to external systems, but at the same time, everyone always has availability of the most recent information fully consolidated by the database with a complete audit trail. That's the end of the video. Thank you.